What's up, summoners? King Blair here. If you didn't already know, the collab with That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime has officially started, and we are confirmed to get Rimuru and Milim as banner heroes and Shuna as the free hero. So we're going to be spending the day talking about the Rimuru banner as well as the future banner with Milim a little bit, just deciding on what you should do if you're a free-to-play player and you're low on bookmarks, especially because we just came from a massive summoning session with a bunch of other limiteds and great reruns. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and Discord server, link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The video should also be split into sections. First, we're talking about the summary, where we are, kind of what Rimuru is supposed to do, as well as what I recommend for like unit pulling and all that good stuff. And then it's going to be into the actual kit of Rimuru, and we'll look at the artifact very shortly because it's a really cool artifact. But with that out of the way, let's get right into it, starting first with Rimuru and the whole collab, right? The collab came at a really bad time. We just got back from Rem and Amelia, who were two other limited heroes, right? And we just had the Luna rerun and the Landy rerun, so we're like everyone's extremely drained. I had to spend to try to actually pull Rimuru, and I ended up having to pity him, so it's gonna be rough. I was not able to go for any imprints of any sort, and bookmarks are very low, right? And if you're a free-to-play player, you may not be able to get both heroes. What I recommend, if you're a free-to-play player that doesn't care about climbing this RTA season in particular, or even within the next week, and even if you're just climbing to Masters, I would suggest waiting till next week to actually pull for him. Why? If you only can guarantee yourself one, it's better to wait till next week to see how Milim is going to do and make the decision, because they will be running at the same time. This banner will not end until November 11th, and the Milim banner comes next week at around, I believe it's November 4th, on that Wednesday. So there's no reason to pull now unless you really want to use them for climbing to Emperor, which if you're climbing to Emperor, you might actually need him because he's actually pretty strong, right? He's really good. As far as limiteds, you always want to try to pull for both if possible, but again, I know that's not going to be possible for free-to-play players or new players because Smilegate kind of is flooding us with a lot of stuff. Hopefully they help you guys a little bit with some of the summons. But with that in mind, how good is Rimuru? Well, Rimuru is actually going to be a really solid unit, which turned out to be way different than initially thought with the kit. I actually did build mine, and I'll show the build and how I've been using him. But the big thing is that he is a nuker that also doubles as a counter to buff teams. It's really weird, but it works really well. And he works extremely well in bruiser teams as well as in aggro teams, right? That seems to be like his niche. I haven't seen a lot of people actually cleave with him, but I am sure they're going to figure out ways to actually cleave with him because he does have the potential just because of how good his single target damage is on that S3, right? It's ridiculous single target damage. So with that, let's actually go in and I'll show you guys the build that I've been using, talk about it very briefly, and then we'll actually go to the unit kit. And again, I'll try to make it brief because I know you guys don't like the really long videos. By the way, let me know if you like the current sound quality. I went to do it on my tablet because I realized my mic has been not so great recently, so I kind of want to see if the mic is a lot better. But here is the Rimuru build that I've been using. I went with the very bulky one. I really like him surviving. He tends to get focused down really hard. The immunity, I honestly might switch him from speed set to give him immunity and drop a little bit of the speed and drop him closer to 190, 180. But given, give him an immunity set instead. I honestly think that immunity is kind of important on him, so I will likely switch him to penetration set, immunity, and then maybe like an offset, maybe like crit rate set or something crazy like that, right? I still don't know quite what I'm going to do with the side sets, but again, I will likely change this build because he kind of does need immunity. I thought he wouldn't, but I've been losing a lot of matches because I didn't have immunity. But again, if you look, he doesn't have that much attack, so how is he a nuker, right? That's what you might be thinking, right? He's bulky, and he looks like a bruiser, but how is he one-shotting things like Rem and Ravi? And he can one-shot Rem and Ravi, right? That is like easy for him. My build also will one-shot or get really close to one-shotting a Ravi. It will one-shot Rems, and it will one-shot Landies. Like it's breakfast, right? So why? What's making him so good, and why have I been using him so much in RTA? And why are a lot of people using RTA? Even the number 2 guy, Suck, has actually been first picking him recently because people don't have answers to him yet, right? So there's always a thing that he's brand new and people don't have answers to him. And I'll talk about it a little bit on how to actually counter him because I've actually felt how bad it can be to actually go against certain things. But as far as stat lines, the stat lines are going to be very bruiser. Very good attack, very good health, very good defense, solid speed. 109 is pretty nice. The one thing you have to notice is the crit rate is abysmal, and he is a bruiser that wants to have high crit rate. I suggest using a crit rate neck because a crit rate neck actually gives you the most value per roll, right? It actually has the highest roll value if you use a crit neck. And he actually needs it because you want to get as close as possible to 100, if not 100. And to do that, a crit neck is really going to be the only way. His imprint is also going to be attack, which helps you one-shot even easier. And that's 1:2 ratios are actually pretty nice, especially when paired with something like penetration set. The imprint release, though, for the team kind of sucks. The self-imprint attack, it'd be nice to get it, but again, we are all low. Unless you're willing to whale for multiple imprints. I mean, it's not the strongest imprint on the planet. Crit rate is the strongest one, but attack is nice to have, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have it. He'll still do his job of one-shotting and being an annoying anti-buff counter hero. As far as PvE, I don't think he has a lot of situations. But now let's try to get into it. And can I just start with, I am very happy with how he was implemented. I love the anime. I just finished watching the second season. And man, was that heat. And I feel like they did a really good job to capture his essence, his outfit, his skill animations, the hype I get when I watch him, and just like the personality. They did a great job. I can't complain. As far as models, Smoggy outdid themselves. I'm a big fan, right? So model aside, and like me fangirling over the anime, let's actually talk about the actual kit. First, this one is pretty basic, but it does decent damage, right? I don't even have the skill Fully Malagord out yet, and it's doing like around the same damage that a Ravi or a Ravi S1 would do, right? Which is pretty good, and particularly is going to be because of the pen set, right? The pen set is kind of needed on him to actually get the most out of his skills, since he does have a lot of single target skills that are doing tons of damage. But again, you get a nice little buff, and it is nice to get things like attack buff, immunity. Sometimes the crit risk actually does save the game if they're trying to focus him down and you get the crit resistance buff. It is really nice. If you get the effect resistance buff, it's useless. It sucks. It doesn't really add anything. It's just landy fodder basically at that point. But it is what it is. You know, not everything can be broken. I will say this makes me feel like he does not belong with a counter set. I don't think counter set is right for him because the S1 is not impactful enough. It doesn't give you advantage state to actually really do much. So basic S1, nothing crazy. It just does the job of doing some damage. Now the S2 is the one that actually made me originally pull for him, and why I actually really like him, and why he's good against anti-buff teams, as well as why he's really unique, right? So it's two parts to this second skill. It's a skill as well as a passive. The passive is going to be that when you use a non-basic skill, so it's going to be this S2 extra attack as well as the S3, you copy two of the buffs the opponent has. This can be a very wide variety of things, and I'll go more in depth into this skill because this skill is really, really confusing for a lot of people. So I'll break it down for you in each of the passives. But you get to get two buffs. So Maid Chloe, right, gives attack and revive buff. You get those buffs. If they have invincibility, you get invincibility. If they have immunity, you get immunity, right? So it takes away the advantage the opponent has, not by stripping them of their buffs, but by giving your team the buffs so that you can utilize them, right? And that alone is really, really scary for the opponent, because it makes it so they cannot get the advantage that they normally do, and you're basically getting the buffs while getting the damage that they are not getting. Because most buffers give up something, right? They give up damage or they give up something, right? To be able to get those buffs, you can just tag along and copy them and deny the opponent a lot of advantage. The second part of the passive is that when an ally is attacked by a buffed enemy, you will trigger the skill, and it's not a count. It kind of functions like counterattack, but it's not a counterattack, and I'll explain why that distinction is important. And you will attack them, and since it's a non-basic skill, you will copy two of their buffs and get a really nice 30% CR push, which actually allows you to cut, which does help a lot in a lot of different types of cleaves. And for some cleaves, he actually does really well against. But it's a really solid skill. So now let's actually break it down, because it's a lot more complicated than you may think, and it actually functions in a lot of different ways. First, the attacking with a non-basic skill, copying two buffs. This will not copy things that are broken, right? If you break it, you're not going to be able to get it. What do I mean by that? Skill Nullifier is a really good example. If you hit Skill Nullifier, the buff copy happens after the skill, which means that if you break the Skill Nullifier, you don't get it. The only way for you to get Skill Nullifier is if they have invincibility. The other thing is that if they have Revive buff and you kill the enemy, you will not get Revive buff, but you will get their attack buff. It's kind of weird like how that works, but it's just the way it is. So, and of course, you can't cheese Violet's buffs, and you can't cheese certain Hell Raid teams or Hell Raid bosses where you normally would, you know, get their really broken buffs. You're not always going to get it. But for Queen, you can actually copy the greater attack buff and the greater defense buff, which is kind of crazy to think about as well. It's just really solid. The other part is going to be the second part, which is actually the extra skill. There's a reason why I didn't call it a counter. The reason being is because counterattacks cannot trigger on a counterattack, and counterattacks cannot trigger on skills that don't trigger counterattacks. This skill can't. Think about it like Mercedes Magic for Friends. But if you're still not sure how that functions, essentially think of a unit like Landy's S3. That skill does not trigger counterattacks. If no one has hit you that has a buff and Landy hits you, this will trigger. It will trigger even though Landy says no counterattacks can happen. It's not a counterattack, it's a skill. So you will trigger this, you will steal Landy's buffs, right? You will steal her speed buff, and you'll steal all the other stuff. The other thing is that this skill is, I mentioned it before, but it's after the hit and before for the condition. So what I mean by that is for this to trigger, the enemy has to have buffs before they hit you. So someone like Cerise, if she doesn't have immunity or guiding light, even though she gets invincibility after the hit, that during the hit, she does not have that, so she will not trigger the counterattack, right? So that part, kind of important, but on the hindsight, if it does trigger, but you break something, then you don't get it. I know it's confusing, you'll get to play around more, and if you're confused about that, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try to explain it better in writing. And then last, but definitely not least, this skill that actually makes Rimuru a meta unit that I actually really think is going to be good for a very long time is the S3. Why is this skill so good? Because at its core, all it's doing is damage, and the damage that it does is true. This skill has a fixed damage aspect to it, as well as just a regular damage aspect to it. So, at worst, if you have no buffs on your team, right? No buffs on your team at all, you will do 5,000 true damage. This can be mitigated by things like Aureus, because Aureus will share the damage, or Crimson Armin, because Crimson Armin just flat out reduces damage received, right? This, however, will kill T-Serin, right? Even though I know she's not even really a unit, it will kill T-Serin because it's essentially fixed damage. It's true damage. It's just going to happen, right? And on top of all that, why Penetration Set is so good is because you still have your second part of your attack that actually scales with your attack. It has very bad scaling. Like the actual scaling is not great, but when you're adding it on top of true damage, it's still really good damage, right? You're still chunking, right? Especially with the Penetration Set. So this skill, on average, is actually going to be doing anywhere from 15 to 25k. Because the first 10k is true, or the first 5 to 10k is true, and then the second part depends on the enemy's defense and how good your Rimuru is, right? I've seen a variety of different builds of like damage builds Rimurus. Damage Rimurus will do 20 to 25 consistently. My Rimuru, the one you saw, the super bulky, barely any attack Rimuru that I showed you guys earlier, consistently does 15 to 25k depending on the number of buffs that I have, because the first 10k is free. It's fixed. It's going to happen. They can't do anything about it. And to top it all off, if you hit an enemy that has buffs, you decrease defense AoE, which means that you can actually set up into a pseudo cleave, which is why I actually think he has potential for aggro and for cleave units because of that. And on top of all of this, this skill does not check elements. This means you can hit fire units. That's all it needs. You don't get elemental advantage where you get the extra 15% that Luna does for crit rate and the extra damage, but you are going to hit things like Charlotte. A lot of people will pick Charlotte against Rimuru and then will be shocked when they just get one shot for free, right? Charlotte is not a counter to Rimuru just because this skill just ignores elemental disadvantage, right? So again, very, 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 very broken skill, right? It's the skill that makes him super good. And if you manage to get souls, you can have a tactical nuke every other turn. In Frenzy, this is GG. If you don't kill Rimuru by the time you get to Frenzy 3, just accept that you're losing a unit every other turn, right? Just accept it. It's gonna happen to you. Like, it sucks, but it's gonna happen to you. Just accept it. But all right, so as far as how you would actually use him, I mentioned he's really good for Bruiser teams and for anti-Bruiser, right? He's really good against slow, bulky teams that rely on buffs, so like a lot of Maid Chloe teams and Landy teams, because you're able to take away the advantage that they normally get, like with the Landy, and you can come in and one-shot one of their units, right? He destroys Rem. He destroys Charlotte. He destroys a Ravi. If you're a Bruiser that can't kill him, he will kill you. There is nothing you can do about it. 10,000 true damage plus any damage that you're doing, that's more than 50% of true damage to a Bruiser, right? The only real way to beat him is to either one-shot him or not give him a lot of buffs. But that part is not really up to you, because if he's paired with Maid or with Crimson Armin, all he needs is 8 buffs to actually get that 10k damage, right? And to kill essentially almost any unit on your team. That's a Bruiser, a Squishy, anything, right? Even tanks, he'll get really close to kill him. It's so toxic, but it can be played around. So that leads to his counters and his strength. So counters, he loses to unbuffable so freaking hard. If they have a Bazaar or a Briar Witch or a Angel Light Angelica or a Fairy Tale Tenebria, it's an instant ban for you. Because that's just gonna, not only are they gonna be able to control you because you're a bruiser, right? You're still a bruiser, you're still slow, right? You're not moving at like 2 million speed. But the other thing is that you are dropping that base fixed damage to 5k. Most bruisers will survive like the 5k, 10k damage that he will be doing, right? And then you're dead. You're kind of a useless unit because you don't get your buff copy, right? 10k is not enough to kill almost any unit in this game, right? That's not gonna kill any bruiser. So if they have unbuffable and stop you from getting higher fixed damage, it really hurts, right? You're not killing anything, which means that they're able to set up their buffs and you're not getting the buffs because you're unable to be buffed. So those units I mentioned are arguably the hardest counters. Other things is just control, period. Fucking Flurry just destroys this guy because if you can't S3, you're a useless unit, right? You still get to do this, but you're not particularly tanky. I mean, like you saw how low my attack was, and that's like the minimum attack you probably need. But I will still get one shot with decreased defense, right? Like that, I'm not dodging that, right? I'm gonna die. So fucking Flurry control overall just really destroys him and unable to be buffed. That's the main best way you can deal with him. Aside from just one-shotting, although against Cleave, he doesn't do too bad because he can actually kill Pavel. So he destroys Pavel Cleave and he can steal the opponent's buffs. And depending on the Cleave, sometimes he's a really good anti-Cleave because he's able to cut in, right? If they don't have Pallades, you're able to come in with an S2 after they hit you, cut, and then kill one of their units, right? And then they're just like, oh, I messed up. GG. So that part's really cool. Really good unit. I think he's honestly future-proof in the fact that it's just, I don't see him being bad ever. Like, how is this guy going to be bad? Inherently, all he's doing is like damage and copying buffs, which is really good. So, should you pull for him? Yes or no? I think both Milim and Rimuru are units you want. If you can get both, I would get both. If I had to choose one. Now, we don't know how Milim's going to do, and I haven't tried her. Of course, I've tried Rimuru, so I can tell he's really good. But I think Rimuru has the potential to be stronger in the future because they both lose to unable to be buffed, but Rimuru has better matchups and doesn't rely on RNG, right? There is no RNG in Rimuru's kit. It's all skill. It's a high ceiling unit, right? He's just a high ceiling unit, whereas Milim is relying on that evasion buff, is relying on taking turn 1, which does introduce more counters and the potential for really good counter units in the future, right? So with that, I would personally say Rimuru also has better PvE potential for early game players, for things like Raid and for even things like Asimec Hunt, because you're able to actually consistently take some of the buffs. But overall, or copy the buffs, not take them. But overall, he's really cool unit. I really like Rimuru. I think he's amazing, and I would definitely pull for him if you can, right? Especially because he's limited. You always want to pull the limiteds. But as far as the artifact, I will quickly go over it since I did mention I was going to talk about it. It's basically Justice for All for warriors. You get a chance to get a random buff for 2 turns, but all the buffs that you get on this are broken. Every single buff is nice. Immunity, great. Attack, great. Defense, great. Crit hit damage, great. Increased speed, great. All of these are great, and the fact that all of them work in different situations, I actually think this artifact has potential to be one of A. Robbie's best artifacts, and for other warriors as well. It's a really good artifact. I think it's one of the best artifacts Mage has released in a while, honestly, aside from things like Comet. So really good addition to the warrior lineup because it just adds buffs for free for you taking turns, which is really cool for units that can actually take turns. And A. Robbie's the big one that comes to mind because if you get immunity, that's kind of hard to deal with, or even attack buff or crit damage buff. That's scary. But yeah, overall, I would definitely pull for Rimuru. I really like him. I think he has a very high ceiling. I can show you some of the games I played him. I was kind of pegging on some of them near the end. I was definitely not doing too hot near the end. But that's because I was kind of tilted. But at the beginning, I was doing really good, right? So I did tilt near the end, but there was a lot of games that he also did pop off for me and did really good. And the number 2 player right now is first picking Rimuru, in case you were wondering. He did luck sack me, but again, he one-shot my Amelia. So he created a 3v4 situation quite early. But that is going to be all I have for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Peace.